Hi everyone, this tutorial is going to show you how to create a brand new virtual machine running Kali Linux on VirtualBox for Windows. It's really quite straightforward, but if you're new to VirtualBox or you've been trying to do this and you've come up against a roadblock, then it might be helpful. So let's start off, just have a look at the ingredients we need to do this. First off, we need a current version of VirtualBox from Oracle. This is version 5. VirtualBox is great. It's not the only virtualization software, but I like it. It's intuitive, it works, and best of all, it's free. As you can see, I've already downloaded and installed this. It's up and running and ready to go. If you haven't got it, this is where you can go to get that program, www.virtualbox.org. And in case you haven't worked it out, and I hope you have, the download VirtualBox 5.0 button will do the trick. Once you've downloaded that, run it, install it, and get to here. Okay. The next thing we need before we start is a Kali Linux disk image file, or a .iso file. This is what you are going to point VirtualBox at. You're going to tell it, here is the CD for my Kali Linux. That's what it looks like. You will get that, if you haven't already done so, from the Kali page, www.kali.org/downloads. You can see here you've got a few different flavors to go at. If you're running this on any sort of desktop or laptop machine, you don't need to go with the light or the mini versions, just stick with the main distro. You've got a choice of 64 and 32. Chances are 64 is great. If you're trying to do this on an old machine with fairly dated processor, you might have to use 32. Use 64 by default. You've got two ways to download it. You can just download the ISO file directly by clicking there, which will put it in your downloads folder, or you can torrent it from here. If you know how to torrent it because it will be quicker. The direct download is fairly slow. It took me about half an hour to download, and it's not a massive file, but you know, the choice is yours there. What you will have when you've done that is your ISO file sitting ready to go. We'll leave that there. So here we go, into VirtualBox. First thing we will do is click New. We want a new virtual machine, and we will give it a name. Naturally, calling it Kali. What type of virtual machine is this? No, it's not Microsoft Windows. It is a Linux. And which version? You might be looking through this list thinking, where's Kali? I can't find Kali. That's because Kali is actually based on the Debian distro, and we've got 32 and 64-bit options there. Go with 64. If you get to this point and you are not seeing any 64-bit options for any of these, it may be that your rig isn't set up to enable virtualization. You can, if you know how to do it, restart your computer, go into your BIOS settings and have a look for a button that says enable virtualization or something like that. You'll probably find that it's not ticked. Tick it, come back in, and you should see these 64-bit options in there. So there we go, Kali, Linux, Debian 64-bit, click next. So now we are asked how much RAM we want to allocate to the virtual machine. You can see it defaults here to 768 megabytes. It's probably enough to run Linux. What you have to bear in mind here is how much RAM you have on your host machine. As you can see, my host here is 16 gigs, which means that I can allocate a little bit more than that and not really take a hit for my host. If your host only had maybe 4 gigs, you would want to be really thinking about how much you're going to give to your virtual machine. Because once you allocate some RAM to your virtual machine, when that VM is running, then that RAM is no longer available to your host. So if you had a 4 gig host and you gave 2 gigs to your virtual machine, you would be left with only 2 gigs for your host, which with any modern Windows is probably not going to be enough. But we've got 16 here. I'm going to be generous. I'm going to up this to 2 gigs for the Kali machine. Probably even too much, but rather too much than not enough. Hit next. Now then, this bit's interesting. We need to create a virtual hard disk for our virtual machine. It says here the recommended size of the hard disk is 8 GB. That is a lie. If we try and install this version of Kali on an 8 GB hard disk, it will fail because there's not enough space. I'm not sure exactly how much, depending where you read on the internet, but 10 is the absolute minimum according to most commenters. I tend to make it 16. So create a virtual hard disk now. We're going to choose the size in just a minute, so hit create. We're going to stick with the VDI, VirtualBox disk image. It's selected by default. These have reasons why you might want to choose them. However, if you're new to this, which you probably are if you're watching this tutorial, then stick with VDI. Now we can choose between a dynamic or a fixed size hard disk. You can read that if you want to understand it. However, the bottom line is fixed size is quicker, and therefore we are going to use it. Now here's where we get to choose the size. You see it's defaulted to 8 GB. It's not enough. Make it 16. If later on in the installation you get a failure message, come back, start again, and when you get to here, maybe give it 32 gigabytes of space. 16 is enough for this version. However, if you're watching this video in 12 months time, you might have an updated version of Kali which might need more disk space. So for me, 16 is good. Hit create. Now this will take a little while just to create the disk, no more than a couple of minutes. It depends on the write speed of your own hard disk, to be honest. Okay, so when the virtual hard disk has finished being created, this is the screen that you'll be faced with. Now the alert ones among you may have noticed that my system clock down here has progressed by about an hour and a half. That's not how long it takes to make the virtual hard drive, that's just how long it takes for me to go to the pub and have some tea before coming back to finish this video. If you want to do the same, I can't recommend it enough. So what we've got here now is our virtual machine here sitting in our VirtualBox manager, and it's ready to go. Just have a quick glance at some of the settings through here. We can see we've got some RAM allocated, 2 GB, which is what we did. Some video memory, that's set at 12 at the minute. Don't worry about that for the time being, that may be addressed in a future video. And here you can see in our storage section we've got an optical drive which is empty, and we've got our Kali.vdi 16 GB hard disk that we have just created. Down here we have got some settings to do with the network and the USB drivers. Now here we could hit start and fire up the Kali machine, but nothing will happen, it won't work if we do that now. We have to change some things. So with Kali highlighted here, we hit settings, and there's a few things we need to alter here. First of all, in storage we can see our hard drive Kali.vdi currently empty, and we've also got our optical drive which is likewise empty. Now as with any new machine, what we need to do is install an operating system. We have told VirtualBox that this is a Kali machine, but we haven't actually installed a Kali operating system at this point. So what we need to do is point it at our Kali disk. So add optical drive here, click, choose disk, and then navigate to wherever you have put your Kali ISO file, because remember, an ISO file is to all intents and purposes the disk. So that is our Kali installation disk. Click open, and that is now sitting in our virtual optical drive. The next thing we want to change is here in the network settings. Now there'll be more on this in future videos, but for the time being we need to make sure that enable network adapter is ticked, and where it says attached to, we want to click for the drop down menu and for the time being we're going to choose bridged adapter. What that does is tells this virtual machine that it is to share the actual wireless adapter that your host is using. So assuming that your Windows host has internet access and is connected to the internet, whether that's through a wireless card, whether that's through the Ethernet, whichever, this Kali virtual machine will share that connection. So that's what we're going to do. We are also going to enter the display section just to see here. The video memory that's allocated is only 12 megabytes. If you have got a dedicated graphics card installed, and it is one that's been made in the last few years, it's probably going to have a gigabyte or more of dedicated video RAM, and therefore I would allocate this virtual machine the maximum of 128 megabytes. It will just speed up the way things respond within the virtual machine, and that will not have a massive impact on your own graphics performance. If you've got an older machine, or if you've got onboard graphics without a dedicated graphics card, perhaps you would knock this back down, but for me I'm going to leave it up at 128. More about these settings will come in further videos. For the time being we're going to click OK. OK. Now our virtual machine is ready to fire up and go. We're going to click Start. So what you can see, VirtualBox opens a brand new window and it gives us options for Kali. This is as if we had fired up literally a brand new machine with a Kali disk in the disk drive. These are the options that it provides us with. This doesn't have a mouse interactivity at the moment. We're simply going to click within that window and then use the arrows on the keyboard to highlight our option. And the option we want is install, and then hit enter to choose it. So this is now going to set about the process of installing your Kali operating system on your virtual hard disk. You saw a couple of error messages pop up there in the console. Don't worry about those. You get them, they don't affect the installation. So here we go, choose a language. I'm choosing English, you choose whatever you want. Likewise for country or territory, I'm going to go with United Kingdom, because clearly that's where I'm from. And British English is what I speak. So here we go. We're going through the install period now. If you hit any errors during this, it may be, as I said before, down to there not being enough space on your virtual hard disk. If that's the case, the first thing I would try is go back to the start and follow everything we've done, but allocate more space for the virtual hard disk. That might resolve a problem. A lot of these bars will whiz across, some of them will take a little bit longer. Okay, so now we've been given an option here to give a host name for the system. Host name is device name, the plain text name by which your virtual machine will be known. So, Kali box suits for me. Use the down arrow to highlight continue and hit enter. Now it wants to know a domain name if you're using a domain within your home network. If you are, you will know about it and you'll know how to configure this. If you don't know about this, just leave it as a default, highlight continue and hit enter. Now we need to set a password now for the root user. Root will be the default main user of Kali Linux. Root is your username. You need to choose a user password, enter whatever you like. You then must confirm it. And the installation will continue. Now we are asked about disk partitioning. There are options here that are a little bit more complicated. If you are at the point where you're doing this for the first time, go with the defaults, go with the easy option. So use the entire disk. Where it says use entire disk, this does not mean your entire actual hard disk of 500 megs or 1 terabyte or whatever you've got. Where it says use entire disk, this means use the entire 16 gigabyte virtual disk that you've given to the machine. So we're happy with that, that's what we're going to go with. Here we're being asked to choose which disk to install to, or sorry, which partition to install to. We only have one, and it is our 16 gig. It shows there as 17.2 gigabytes, but it's the 16 gigabyte disk that we've allocated to this machine. So hit enter. One more option here to do with partitions. If you're a beginner, stick with the default of all files in one partition. This screen is simply to make sure we're happy with what we've chosen, and we are. So we're going to leave finish partitioning and write changes to disk highlighted and hit enter. And it's given us one more chance here to stop doing that in case we've ballsed it up, but we haven't. So we're going to flick across to yes, write the changes to disks, yes, enter. Now this bit might take a little while as well, installing the system. It's actually copying the OS files to the hard disk. This is the point where if you've not allocated enough space to your virtual hard disk, this is the point at which it will fail, and you may get an error message that's very generic and just says a step has failed in the installation. As I said before, if that happens, just close the virtual machine down, delete it from VirtualBox, start again and allocate more space next time round. I'm confident this is going to work, however, so we will very shortly just fast forward to after it has completed. Okay, now we're at the point where our OS has got to the end of the installing section, and we've been presented with another question about using a network mirror. Earlier, if you remember, we set our VirtualBox to use a bridged adapter so that our virtual machine could share the internet connection that was available to our host. If that is the case and you have done that and you have internet available, you can choose yes here. If you haven't, you can choose no. It matters not, both will complete the installation, but if you use a network mirror it will basically check for updates and make sure you've got the most current version of Kali. Choose whichever is the most appropriate. I'm going to go with yes. Asking for any proxy information. Again, this is something, if you've got one you will know it, so if you don't know it just hit continue, because you probably don't need one. And you'll see the application start to retrieve files remotely. Just while this is doing, I just want to highlight these little speech bubble things that pop up at the top of VirtualBox. If you actually click on one of these, it will fill out and tell you what the full message is. Read them because they explain how your mouse and keyboard will interact with your virtual machine, and it tends to vary from one system to the next. What this is saying is that because I have mouse pointer integration, if my mouse is over here it will be active within the virtual machine, but if my mouse is over here it will be active within my host. Sometimes that is not the case, and once you click within your virtual machine it will capture your mouse and you will not be able to use it outside of this small window. If that happens, you just need to hit the right control button, which is the host key by default, to release your mouse from the virtual machine. That sounds probably a little bit like gobbledygook. You will understand what I mean if it happens to you. If you find your mouse is trapped, hit right control, click, move around a bit and you'll get out. So here we go, we've got to another option here. This is asking questions about the grub bootloader. This is, if you don't understand what bootloaders are, you don't need to worry about the technicalities of it for what we're doing here. It is just it describes how a machine will boot into an operating system when it's been switched on from cold. For this we're going to choose yes. It's going to ask us for the device to which we're going to install our bootloader and our master boot record. We're going to choose that one because that is the hard disk, the only one we've got, it's the only partition we've got, it is what we're using for this virtual machine. Highlight it, hit enter. We get to see some more progress bars. And when this is finished, what we will have, there we go, the installation is complete, so we can now boot into our new system. You'll see the message there that tells you make sure to remove the installation media, CD-ROM or floppies, so that you boot into the new system rather than restarting the installation. That is a kind of legacy message, because it doesn't know it's in a virtual machine. It thinks it is in a computer and that there is a disk in the disk drive, and that the computer is configured to boot from the optical disk drive. So what it's telling you is remove that disk so that you don't end up redoing everything you've just done. You can actually disregard that because VirtualBox is clever. It knows you've installed an operating system, and so it will have automatically removed that optical disk from the virtual optical drive. Hopefully that makes sense. Continue is highlighted, that's what we want to do, hit enter. More progress bars, and in a moment effectively this virtual machine will reboot, and when it does we will be in Kali. This can be put anywhere on your screen, can be resized. You'll see at the moment that the size of the actual Kali screen is fixed. You won't be able to make it full screen. You can make your VirtualBox window full screen by hitting that button there, but the actual Kali system will remain that size. That can be addressed, and you can have your virtual machine running in full screen mode. However, it's something that I'll cover in a future video entitled Installing Guest Additions in VirtualBox. Okay, so here we go. Our Kali system is rebooting. Look quickly down here, optical drive empty in VirtualBox, because it has removed the installation disk from the optical drive automatically. As we can see over here, we didn't choose anything in that menu that Kali gave us. It's booted up. We're at the point where we need to enter our username and our password. Our username is root, lowercase. Our password is password123 or whatever you used. Sign in. And here you are. You are on your Kali Linux desktop. The bubbles that you have now read and understood, we can just hit the X and get rid of them. If you want to make that full screen to simplify matters, you can. And here we go. That's the end of this tutorial. I hope you enjoyed it, I hope it worked. Thank you for watching. Please feel free to leave comments or subscribe or click like or anything like that. This is an ad-free tutorial. I'm not making any money from this stuff. I'm just putting it out there for the hell of it, to help people like me when I was learning to do it. Okay. Cheers guys.